Casey Nicholaw had a choice to make. The kind of choice nobody prepares for and that no Broadway director could ever imagine facing. What should Santa look like? Not the most conventional question, but neither were any of the other ones he constantly faced as the director of Elf the Musical. On the table in front of him sat hundreds of Kris Kringle pictures. Macy's Santa, Coca-Cola Santa, Norman Rockwell Santa, Salvation Army Santa. Each one possessed a unique style. He just needed to figure out which ones would work for the musical's 10 Santa variants. Broadway shows are chaotic by nature, but Elf operated on a whole nother level. A few weeks before this, Nicholaw needed to decide whether or not to get rid of a sequence where their lead actor drop-kicked dozens of penguin puppets across the North Pole. The creative team of Elf faced questions like this on and off for 3 years. But the ones they faced behind the scenes were much more consequential. Would the show actually happen? Would audiences enjoy it? Would they start a new holiday tradition? The 2003 film about a human-raised elf constantly ranks as one of the greatest Christmas movies of all time, and occupies countless television screens every winter. How could they possibly turn this low-budget comedy into a multi-million-dollar Broadway musical? Well, now that is a long elfin story. Hi, I'm Paul Goodelf. I'm no stranger to countless adventures, meaning danger waits for me around every corner. One time, I got trapped in a revolving door for 3 hours and was out of work for months. When I got back to the North Pole and saw the hospital bills, I nearly lost my gumdrops. I knew it was time to deliver a present of my own, a lawsuit for pain and suffering. Something people don't realize is that when they sue for an injury, they're not putting the person who caused the injury on the naughty list. They're suing the insurance companies that's sitting on billions of dollars. And that's why I'm happy to introduce this video's sponsor, Morgan & Morgan. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm, with workshops all across America and more than 800 lawyers ready to deck the halls for you. If you're ever injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. Their fee is free unless they win. For more information, go to forthepeople.com or dial #law, #529 from your cell phone. To walk through New York during the holidays is to walk through a bizarre dreamland. The shadows dim into this sparkling hue of red and green. Gold blinking bulbs reflect off milky gray puddles, and the sprawling metropolis transforms into an enchanting, rat-infested North Pole. The city's long been a go-to for Christmas movies, but only one truly captured that perfect mix of nice and vice.
Sorry.
The story of Elf starts 2,000 miles away, in the plastic world of Los Angeles in 1993. Working at a lingerie factory during the day and writing scripts at night, David Berenbaum escaped the uncharacteristically hot California winters by watching a ton of old Christmas movies. Berenbaum held a fondness for the magic of the holiday, even though he was Jewish. Each night, the television screen beamed colorful Rankin-Bass Christmas specials, helping the writer turn a blind eye to the growing stack of abandoned scripts and journey back to simpler times growing up in Philadelphia. One night, an old childhood favorite came on.
Why am I such a misfit? I am not just a nitwit.
The story of the misfit reindeer looking for a place of belonging resonated with him more than ever.
Why don't I fit in?
And the cogs started turning. What if he turned Rudolph into a giant elf? In his screenplay, Berenbaum focused on a baby named Buddy, who accidentally crawls into Santa's bag and winds up in the North Pole. After years of failed toy making and cramped showers, Papa Elf reveals the shocking truth to a now adult Buddy. He's actually a human. With Santa's blessing, Buddy decides to travel to New York City to find his real father, a book publisher named Walter who's on the naughty list. Nearly every major studio passed on financing the script, until a rookie VP of production at New Line Cinema named Cale Boyder found out about the project and convinced founder Robert Shaye and CEO Michael Lynn to greenlight the film. Next came the hard part: making the thing. By all accounts, Elf the movie never should have happened. It was a ragtag group of unproven writers, producers, actors, and directors all learning on the job. While this might have been concerning for other major movie studios, New Line Cinema was built on this independent spirit, fueled by creative risk-taking. The idea of a fully grown man in an elf costume running around the Big Apple sounded funny enough, but Berenbaum and director Jon Favreau didn't want the movie to just be a series of gags. They wanted to make a timeless Christmas classic. In addition to witty humor, the movie also needed a lot of heart. 10 years after David Berenbaum's first completed draft, Elf took over Rockefeller Center on November 2nd, 2003 for its New York premiere. Surrounded by fake snow and a half-decorated Christmas tree, Berenbaum shook hands with Mark Kaufman, a senior executive for New Line's theatrical stage department. Greeting Berenbaum with a smile, Kaufman said, "Hey, I love the movie. I think it'd make a great musical." The holiday season brings with it a number of New York City stage traditions. Somehow, this recurring annual spirit never makes it to Broadway. Sure, musicals like Mame and Annie include Christmas elements in their story, but so does Hobby Lobby. That doesn't mean they're not about something different entirely. One of the only shows to come close was when Patrick Page suited up as the Grinch in 2006. The musical version of How the Grinch Stole Christmas targeted families and tourists during one of the busiest times of the year, shattering box office records and even ending Wicked's 100-week streak as the highest-grossing show on Broadway. In an interview with Playbill, Tom Miller said, "We want to bring it back every season," and mentioned the company held a 20-year agreement with the Dr. Seuss estate. The show only returned to Broadway once, in 2007. Mark Kaufman assembled a hodgepodge creative team of industry veterans and untested artists to bring Elf to Broadway and make a Christmas tradition of their own. Following the mammoth success of Hairspray in 2002, the higher-ups of New Line Cinema, Robert Shaye and Michael Lynn, felt emboldened to make more musicals based on their films, hiring first-time composers Matthew Sklar and Chad Beglin for a musicalization of The Wedding Singer in 2006.
And they said, whatever happens with Wedding Singer, we love working with you guys, and we want to make a stage adaptation of Elf. And we were both like, absolutely. It's one of my favorite movies. And then it was Mark's idea to team us up with Tom Meehan to write the book.
At 77 years old, Thomas Meehan was the hottest writer on Broadway. His genuine warm humor helped turn shows like The Producers and Annie into Broadway behemoths. After Meehan's Tony Award-winning work on New Line's Hairspray, there was no way Kaufman would pass up working with him again. Elf the Musical inched closer and closer to takeoff. They just needed one more person to help get this sleigh off the ground.
Oh God, I'm so sorry the lighting is so terrible.
The tree in Rockefeller Center uses enough electricity in a day to power a 2,000 square foot home for a month. That doesn't even come close to matching the energy of Casey Nicholaw. Before taking Broadway by storm in the 2010s with shows like Something Rotten, Mean Girls, and The Prom, Nicholaw experienced his first taste of commercial success in 2006 with his directorial debut, The Drowsy Chaperone. Motivated from the critical and commercial response, Nicholaw eagerly searched for his next idea to conquer the musical comedy world. A light bulb went off when he settled down one evening to watch his favorite Christmas movie, Elf.
I was watching it because I've always loved the movie, and I thought, oh my God, this would make a great musical.
I feel like Casey wanted to pitch a producer, wanted to go to the producer and pitch Elf the musical, and then he found out it was already happening. It was happening with us.
I talked to them, and they said, oh my gosh, we don't have a director yet.
So that was very easy, just to say, Casey Nicholaw wants to direct and choreograph Elf the musical with us. What do you say? And they were like, absolutely, done deal.
The team spent the next year spinning in a revolving door of concepts and ideas. What should the show sound like? What's its spirit? What do they do about the ending? As writer Tom Meehan said in an interview with Vanity Fair, the movie is terrific, but it has a lot of flaws. The whole last half hour, it just goes to hell. In the film's climax, the charmingly modest Christmas story turns into something straight out of The Fugitive. Santa becomes locked in a wild chase after his sleigh breaks down from lack of Christmas spirit. In the end, Jovi, Buddy's quirky and shy coworker, gets a crowd of New Yorkers to sing together, helping Santa escape. Not only was the cross-city pursuit too expensive to stage, it also distracted from the more important themes of family, belonging, and the magic of the holidays. In the grand scheme of things, Jovi overcoming her fear with the impromptu Christmas Carol provided both a cheaper solution to staging the finale and, all in all, a more satisfying emotional payoff. After a couple more months, the script finally hit a point where the team needed to see it on its feet. They thought it was funny, but they wouldn't really know until someone else sat down in a chair and acted the piece out loud. Thankfully, Nicholaw knew the funniest man in chair around, Bob Martin. Martin joined his buddy for an early reading of Act 1.
It's always good to have to work with an actor, especially when you're doing a comedy. It's good to work with a comedian to hear the material read as opposed to just, thinking of the piece in the abstract. So he asked me to come into the room.
I knew him and I'm like, guys, we need to get Bob Martin in here because I think he'd be a really funny Buddy the Elf.
I was never going to play Buddy because Buddy would have been, first of all, disturbingly old, but also I can't sing very well. But because, I can't keep my mouth shut, I was also offering up ideas and how the story could be improved and whatever.
We were looking for more jokes and stuff in the script because it wasn't as funny as we wanted it to be. And I asked Tom Meehan, I said, what are we going to do to get more jokes? Because Tom was like, I'm not that kind of a playwright with those kind of jokes that we probably need here. And I said, well, what do you think we should do? And he said, I think we should call Bob Martin and see if he'll join us.
Bob Martin walked into Tom Meehan's Greenwich Village home. The walls a collage of original Al Hirschfeld sketches and Annie posters. Martin didn't know what to expect. He'd written Drowsy with some of his closest friends, but now he sat across from Broadway royalty. Something magic happens when two comedians sit across from each other. Call it camaraderie or competition, but each session inevitably turns into a riff session, with each comedian trying their hardest to make the other one laugh. Especially with vastly different comedic styles like Bob Martin and Tom Meehan.
We were just trying to make each other laugh. And there's just no greater pleasure than making someone like Tom Meehan laugh.
After 2 years of outlines and drafts, the musical's momentum abruptly stopped when a huge Hollywood shakeup threatened to put this elf on the shelf. In February 2008, the 40-year legacy of New Line Cinema rapidly came crashing down. Following a disastrous 5-year string of flop films, Time Warner announced New Line would be folded into Warner Brothers Pictures, leaving 450 out of work, including New Line executive Mark Kaufman. Nobody knew what the future held. Warner Brothers' theater arm, Warner Brothers Theater Ventures, had tried Broadway only once before, with a 2006 vampire musical called Lestat that closed in a month. Everything came down to a reading in November of 2008. with a pair of Warner Brothers executives who weren't exactly jumping up and down about the idea of doing a holiday show. Already working with a severely limited timeline, things got worse when the actress portraying Emily Hobbs, Buddy's stepmom, dropped out at the last second, leaving the team with less than a day to fill the part.
I was like, oh my God, what? She said she was on vocal rest, and so she couldn't do anything. And so we're like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? And she's like, and so we called Beth.
The title character in The Drowsy Chaperone, Beth Level answered her phone to an audibly distraught Nicola.
He kind of called me in a panic, going, oh my gosh, can you get in here and read this part of Emily?
And we were like, well, Beth may not really be totally right for this role. And then Beth turned it into the role it is because Beth was Beth.
Went home that night and studied like I was going to take some kind of, bar exam, because I don't read music very well, so I just studied and studied and studied.
The next day, everyone gathered to present the rough version of Elf the Musical. As the cast took their bows, any skepticism Executive Vice President Greg Madej held towards the show vanished, and he immediately started pitching the show to his Warner Brothers colleagues. The way Madej saw it, if it succeeded in New York, it could continue to run annually. If it failed, they could still make a profit from future tours and licensing. Cautiously, Elf the Musical moved forward, pending further consideration from Warner Brothers. The studio agreed to partner back up with New Line's Michael Lynn and Mark Kaufman. Warner Brothers wanted to test the show before committing to a multi-million-dollar production. Putting on a Broadway show is a huge gamble, and to offset the risk, most Broadway-bound musicals do a run of performances outside of New York to work out any kinks. Elf couldn't do that. Putting up a huge Christmas show in July didn't exactly make sense financially or logically. Instead, the team assembled at the new 42 Studios in New York for an intense 6-week lab of sweat and sugar plums.
So we were basically doing them as a very expensive, ridiculous audition. And I basically built sets out of foam core and a Sharpie. Yeah, it was pretty awesome.
They had mock-up pieces, mock-up palettes that would come on with, the kitchen table or the whales. I mean, it was like an amazing, cheap version of a very expensive set.
For the most part, the script stayed pretty consistent with the movie. Papa Elf narrated, Santa appeared as the supportive big guy, and Buddy messed everything up in the opening number, Happy All the Time. Everything worked great in writing sessions, but the team made an unfortunate realization in these workshops. They spent way too much time in the North Pole.
It was taking us like 30 minutes to get to New York City. And in the first reading, I remember we were like, we just got to get there sooner. So we ended up combining basically the characters of Papa Elf and Santa both into Santa. And then we really worked hard to cut that, the North Pole sequence, because also we had to have actors on their knees. We can't have them doing that for 45 minutes.
In between writing a new opening number, the team also reworked multiple moments from the film that didn't translate well on stage. One moment in particular.
He's an angry elf.
In the movie, Buddy's dad faces an impossible deadline to deliver a best-selling children's book to his boss by Christmas Eve. Needing a quick solution, he brings in a famous author named Miles Finch, who Buddy repeatedly refers to as an elf.
We did go down the road of writing a Miles Finch character and a Miles Finch song. It just didn't feel right.
Instead of Miles Finch, the idea turned into Buddy's dad finding a rare book written by a deceased author named Charles Smith. A rare, irreplaceable book that Buddy puts into a shredder.
We invented another device that, makes the show more universal and you can do it other places than trying to make a short joke,
The weeks morphed into this blizzard of rewrites and performances, with countless writing sessions sprinkled in between their weekly showings. Everything boiled down to week 6. The final showing for approval in front of the Warner Brothers executives. The team felt confident in their show, but knew that the executives could kill the project with a simple thumbs down. Following the performance, everyone waited with fingers crossed as the president of Warner Brothers walked up and asked, "All right, when are we doing this?" Warner Brothers officially announced that Elf the Musical would open on Broadway for the 2010 holiday season. They were just missing one small, teeny thing: an actual cast. After Elf, Will Ferrell completed his ascension from SNL bit player to household name. Ferrell's over-the-top energy and charming innocence made him synonymous with Buddy, meaning whoever put on those curly leather shoes for the musical faced a daunting uphill battle. From Bob Martin to Christian Borle, many an actor read the role during development. When the team went into the actual casting room, they ran each candidate by one main criterion.
Are they Christmassy? We need somebody Christmassy for this.
Enter Sebastian Arcellus. Even though he'd been on Broadway for over 10 years, Arcellus had yet to actually originate a leading role. His contagious enthusiasm, friendly demeanor, and 6-foot stature made him the perfect fit. Arcellus knew he couldn't recreate what Ferrell did on film, and decided to breathe new life into the role by staying honest and earnest. Casting officially wrapped up in late September of 2010. Later that month, the Al Hirschfeld Theater transformed into a giant present just waiting to be unwrapped. Inside, David Rockwell's sets married elements of pop-up books and New York City to create an all-encompassing winter wonderland, further complemented by Greg Barnes' colorful costumes. After only 3 weeks of Broadway rehearsals and 5 previews, Elf the Musical opened on November 14th, 2010. The holiday spirit and excitement of finally opening the show radiated backstage.
Can I show you the gift that Tom Meehan, God rest his soul, gave us on opening night?
Absolutely.
It says Elf on Broadway, and it's a plate of the North Pole. Isn't that fabulous? And it was a little beautifully wrapped box in my dressing room. And it said something clever because he's Tom Meehan. And then there was this beautiful, beautiful plate where Buddy lives.
The show played to a sold-out audience made up of families, Warner Brothers executives, and the original writer of Elf the movie, David Barenbaum. Barenbaum always thought Mark Kaufman was joking when he said, "Let's turn Elf into a musical." So watching his characters dance and sing songs right in front of him felt surreal. The hordes of families streaming out of the theater unanimously left with smiles on their faces and positive things to say about the show. The critics, on the other hand, were much more divided. Stephen Suskin of Variety applauded the show, stating Elf might have found the key for a yearly Christmas show, while a much icier Charles Isherwood of the New York Times somehow managed to both compliment the show and tear it down as a generic cash grab. Despite the mixed responses, Elf broke 3 Broadway box office records for the Al Hirschfeld Theater and ranked as the 3rd best-selling show of the winter season. Statistics like that made it easy for producers to start planning the show's return for the following season. Broadway economics, however, had other ideas. The reason it's easier for the Radio City Rockettes and the Nutcracker at Lincoln Center to do annual performances is because their venues are designed to host numerous different acts each year. This means seasonal shows can always count on the space being free come the holidays. Broadway theaters don't have this luxury. Some shows run for 3 months, while others run for 3 years. Not to mention, competition for that real estate is intense, as Elf found out in 2011.
We thought we were coming back the next year, and then a theater was not available, so we had to wait until 2012 to come back.
Unsatisfied with certain moments of the show, Martin, Meehan, Sklar, and Beglin used the time to make adjustments, like bringing back the original opening song, Happy All the Time, in an attempt to better define the musical's overall tone. In her review for the New York Post, critic Elizabeth Vincentelli stated that the show couldn't tell the difference between childlike and childish. The writing team agreed and keyed in on the overall characterization of Buddy.
When you're in the meat of it and you're putting up the Christmas decorations and you're telling Christmas stories, and it starts to feel like a children's show, and you have to be sure that, well, it isn't actually. Buddy has to be like a frat boy. He has to be a man who is dressed like an elf, but he can't be a child, or else it becomes extremely awkward with Jovi.
1 year and dozens of rewrites later, Elf once again returned to the Al Hirschfeld Theater, with Jordan Gebler assuming the role of Buddy, Leslie Kritzer taking over for Jovi, and Toy Story 2 villain Wayne Knight dressing up as Santa 8 days a week.
Same theater, I had my same dressing room. It was like deja vu. And, the cast had changed. So it was like doing a whole new show.
In a surprising move, the New York Times re-reviewed the musical with an even more scathing piece. In just 8 paragraphs, Neil Genslinger bashed the concept of holiday shows, lamented that the musical wasn't the movie, and even went so far as attacking someone's weight. The show faced surprisingly stiff competition the second go-around, going up against a musical adaptation of A Christmas Story and Tom Meehan's crown jewel, Annie, all vying for the ever-important tourist dollar. In 2010, Elf played to an average capacity of 89%. In 2012, it played to just 81%, following the same downward trajectory as other Christmas musicals like The Grinch in 2007 and White Christmas in 2009. Elf ran for 9 weeks and closed on Broadway one last time on January 6th, 2013. So how does one turn something like Elf into a musical? The answer is by actively trying to make a story that stands on its own instead of just copying and pasting the film onto the stage. It's easy to write Elf off because it's a well-known commercial title, but that doesn't mean it required any less artistry or deserves any less praise. Nary a Christmas show was in sight on Broadway in 2014. But a few miles south, in the magical land of Millburn, New Jersey, Bob Martin started his journey towards the Paper Mill Playhouse.
I don't know, I went through a little bit of a dark time after Elf opened. I had problems with the show and its initial Broadway run and everything. And I'm very, very critical of my own work. This is basically, I think the score is fantastic, but I had issues with the book. And so I was taking the train up to Millburn, and I sort of was looking around me, and all these people were wearing elf hats. I got out of the train and I was walking to the theater and seeing all of these people around, and I couldn't figure out why they were all dressed like that. And then, of course, they were all going to the theater. It's bizarre, but I was not really doing the math in my head. So, and we all sort of filed into the theater, and I felt the energy of this crowd just wanting to be happy and to have this collective Christmas experience. And I realized, oh yeah, I mean, Elf does something very specific for people.
The $10 million musical may not have recouped during its first few runs, but it did precisely what Warner Brothers hoped it would. It consistently stays alive through tours, a new UK production, community theaters, and high schools around the globe. If anything, Elf the Musical truly proved that the best way to spread Christmas cheer is singing loud for all to hear. But one question remains. Did Elf flop? Come to think of it, what even is a Broadway flop? Watch this video to find out.